Everybody, hey, welcome to today's episode where we dive into the challenging yet crucial aspect of safety in steel manufacturing. This industry is inherently dangerous and hazardous, with workers regularly facing extreme conditions such as intense heat, deafening noise, the risk of severe injuries from heavy machinery. It's a setting that really does demand not just hard hats and safety boots, but really a comprehensive approach to safety that integrates constant vigilance, robust training, and really a culture, a culture of care. The importance of rigorous safety protocols can't be overstated in such a high risk environment. Neglecting safety measures can lead to catastrophic outcomes, including life threatening and altering injuries, significant financial penalties for noncompliance. And today, what we aim to do is to shine light on some of these challenges and explore how innovation and diligence can lead to safer work environments. And so we will look at certain systems and strategies and technologies that safety leaders or the safety leader, Doug Matthews, who has been a part of the steel manufacturing industry for over 30 years, are using to mitigate these risks and safeguard their workforce. So, what we'll do is we'll delve into the specifics, identifying some of the most common hazards these workers face, and discussing how top tier safety programs address these challenges. Our goal is to uncover how these safety measures prevent accidents and injuries, ensuring that workers not only have the necessary protection, but they're also part of a culture that prioritizes their well-being above all else. So, Doug Matthews, great to have you. Great to have you on. Thanks for joining.
Hey, Corey, good to be with you. Thanks.
Absolutely. So, look, Doug, I think that the first thing I kind of want to touch on is the high cost of safety negligence. We'll just jump right into it. If you can, I kind of want to talk about some of the financial and human impacts of safety violations within steel. There's some cases from an OSHA compliance standpoint. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines for amputation risks and among some or standard just record keeping fines. So, talk to me a little bit about your experience with some of the financial burdens that steel specifically faces day to day.
Yeah, it's across the spectrum, really. You think about, OSHA has a very comprehensive set of regulations that a lot of the regulations are very applicable to the types of hazards that steel manufacturing companies have to deal with and the workers as well. And most companies actually write their safety programs to make sure they're managing towards compliance to those regulations. It's such a large manufacturing process. The diversity of the types of operations that are in place in order to make steel products, it causes a range of types of hazards that you have to kind of put action plans in place to really mitigate and address. I think most steel companies do a tremendous job, especially here in North America. You look at some of the industrial performance records, as measured by lagging indicators like OSHA recordable rate or lost workday rate. Those are the types of key metrics that you generally see steel companies following. And they generally have, improving results, but there's always opportunities to do better. From a cost perspective, there's negligence and then there's willful when it comes to citations. And some companies have gotten themselves, because of maybe not paying attention or not enforcing safety procedures the way they should. Yeah, I've gotten caught over the last 20, 30 years, and there's been very sizable fines that actually have been very impactful, I think, to some of the steel companies. But really, the true cost of safety, in a manufacturing environment like steel production, really sets in. One, your employees. The most devastating thing that can happen to any company is to have an employee lose their life, at a facility. And from a personal perspective, it's impactful. The family's impacted. The work, coworkers are impacted. There's generally some type of a disruption in operation. as a result, of kind of the injury, that occurred. And that can be very costly as well. So there's a ripple effect, of costs around, making sure that employees are functioning safely in the work environment.
Yeah. I mean, neglecting safety measures can certainly lead to catastrophic outcomes. And in some cases are life threatening, and of course, significant financial penalties for noncompliance, are kind of the protocols that regulatory bodies or OSHA enforces to keep workers and companies compliant. Can you walk me through some of those incidents that you see most common in steel?
Yeah, there's a wide range of types of hazards that you can get exposed to. I would say the most common type of injury is probably strains and sprains. So it'd be more in the ergonomics case. Um, but you also have struck by, struck against, where you have a high you move a lot of things, including
Hmm.
product, but also as you're doing maintenance, as you're restocking supplies, as you're putting consumable products in place that are used to produce steel, like refractories, things like that. You have a high concentration of people walking, and mobile equipment, and in some cases that mobile equipment may have some blind spots, and it uh, just by the nature of the process, it has to interact very close in close quarters to where people might actually be walking as well. Um, you use large transportation systems like rail. So you have an in-plant rail system where you move rail cars around, and you switch cars in and out, and move generally product through rail. But there's a wide range of rail hazards that exist. And then kind of in the front end, of the steel production process, you're dealing mostly with liquid metal, and the integrated steel making processes start with melting iron ore into molten iron, and then moving it into a steel shop and converting that into liquid steel, and then it doesn't actually become solidified till you go through some type of a casting process. So you've got the whole front end of an integrated plant, that's dealing with high temperature steel or iron. In a mini mill facility, it starts with kind of revert scraps that are charged into an EAF and melted, with electrical energy. But still, you have to transfer that liquid steel to a casting process and roll it in order to get it into a solidified shape. Hazards inherent to just liquid metal, are somewhat unique to the steel industry. And then you have kind of byproduct gases that can be toxic, carbon monoxide being one. But you also deal with a lot of inert gases that could create oxygen deficiency type exposures, especially in confined areas. The list goes on, but those are some of the key hazards that you deal with in a steel plant.
Do you have any real life examples that you've heard of or have seen, or anecdotes that for some of the guests that may be listening today that they could, I guess, better understand and may kind of think about how to manage some of those risks?
Yeah, when I think about there's in the steel industry, over the time that I spent in the steel industry, and even predating my time in the steel industry, you hear about certain types of really bad incidents that occurred. In some cases, with multiple fatalities. And fundamentally, when you do the investigation into those, serious incidents and fatalities, you generally have a high level of management involved. You generally have some type of worker involvement, whether it's a non-union shop or the union safety reps. You go through kind of a very detailed investigation. The first thing you try to do is recreate the events that led up to the incident that resulted in the serious injury or fatality.
Hmm.
And then as you, you use a risk matrix, you try to determine how do you best mitigate those circumstances that led up to that. And oftentimes that's administrative controls. So it's retraining the employees or rewriting safe job procedures, or maybe you put alert signs that are out there in the area to remind people of certain hazards. Could be, maybe paint walkways or restricted areas where people can't go without certain PPE. You may even bolster the type of PPE that employees are required to wear. So you do a lot. You take an extensive list of actions, and you generally get really good support in order to drive those actions, out onto the shop floor. I think the one thing that I've been exposed to in my time with Ottman is the ability to now integrate technology that allows you to, one, know when an event occurred, exactly precisely when an event occurs, and being able to respond, accordingly. Oftentimes, these serious incidents or fatalities actually are because the worker might be performing a work activity and be in distress, and the coworkers aren't aware that that employee is in distress. So having the ability to know when the event occurs and when the employee goes into distress, and then being able to go and locate that person more quickly because of technology, can help that tremendously.
That's interesting. So we have a question from a listener right now, and it pertains to this subject. And it's really about how safety protocols differ between older and newer plants. So the question is, how do safety protocols differ between older and newer steel plants?
Yeah, I would say that one, the newer facilities are generally built with more modern equipment that may come with more inherent safety features. Older equipment may have over time, been retrofitted to include some safety equipment. And I think in a lot of cases, the newer equipment might be more automated, requiring less employee kind of involvement in the production, of steel.
So are we talking robotics?
It could be in some case robotics, sure. It could be automation. It could be the kind of the mechanized the movement of the product from one step of the operation to another. But oftentimes, those more modern equipment can create new hazards too, right? So you have to take steps. You raise robotics, which is a great example. So previously, that might have required some manual intervention for an employee to move something from point A to point B. And now technology, is enabled to be able to do that robotically. But if an employee goes into an area where robotics is actually moving, say, pieces of steel or maybe parts and et cetera, that can create hazards with struck by because the robot may not know that the employee's there. So you have to put protection mechanisms in place. So even though there's been advancements in technology, you still have to do area assessments, you have to do risk assessments, and you have to kind of build your safety processes, from the foundation up, to address those types of unique hazards that are part of your process.
Yeah. So I kind of want to stay on the innovations and kind of safety gear and equipment subject. So can you talk a little bit about some of the latest advancements that you've seen in your experience in personal protective equipment and various safety technologies that are making a difference in steel plants today, or could potentially make that difference in steel plants tomorrow?
Well, I think there's been, you just go back and kind of, in time. And there's generally, some type of a historical center at some of the older plants because, they were built in maybe the 20s or maybe even earlier, right? And over 100 years old. And you look at kind of the progression of safety and the importance of safety at companies, it has evolved tremendously. It is really clear. And that's enabled by, one, PPE manufacturers building more robust PPE that further protects the employee and reduces the impact, when an incident occurs. At one time, people wore wool, right, as kind of the heat prevention, right? And now they wear aluminized clothing, and carbon, fiber type protective gear to help protect them. From a technology perspective, just go back in time. It was a canary in the coal mine, right? that was detecting toxic gas, carbon monoxide, and now you've got very advanced sensors that are part of gas detectors that can detect, hundreds of different types of toxic gases at very extremely low levels to provide, alerting to employees. So the advancement of technology, the advancement of technology across the spectrum, has created a better ability to deal with risks and respond to risks. I think what if I was going to say, what is kind of this new evolution, I would say connected worker, right? So having the ability to wear a gas detector that gives me a local alert whenever toxic gases are starting to increase in their percentage that might affect me is fabulous to have that. Being able to alert my coworkers that I'm now being exposed to toxic gases, and if I need to get support and know when I need to get support, is the next advancement. I think in technology and how the role it can play in an industrial setting like steel manufacturing.
Interesting. So I guess I'll kind of play devil's advocate here. So if there's connected devices that are out there or are in the market today, um, what's the hesitation from a company standpoint? You'd think it'd be a simple answer. There's something here that can save workers' lives. Yes, we're going to invest in it because we care about our people. But I don't think it's as easy as it's as easy as just saying it, right? Um, what is the hesitation?
I think that a lot of these steel companies, have done a tremendous job. They really have of kind of driving administrative controls to a level that kind of the lagging indicator frequencies are, world class. As good as anywhere in the world, if not better. And I think that they've become so confident in their administrative controls that there's a little bit of a sense of we're not sure technology plays a role here. Unfortunately, there are occasions when technology could play a role, and I think it's just a matter of people getting comfortable that moving to that next level in the hierarchy of controls with the deployment of technology can actually kind of reduce even further the likelihood of having these types of events. The skepticism. It's why do I need that technology? My administrative controls are working really well for me today, and I think over time you'll just see more and more folks start to adopt the technology and see how it can actually drive that next level of performance.
Yeah. So you think about some of the bigger organizations out there that have voiced publicly that they're focused on safety. Middle Safety Management, their zero harm policy. You have U.S. Steel's safety overhaul a few years ago. Tata's behavioral safety approach that they've taken. Nucor's emergency response improvement plan that they put in place, and even companies like POSCO. POSCO's integrated their own smart safety technology in some of its mills using wearable tech to monitor workers' health indicators and real-time risk detection systems. How can companies that are maybe on the lagging end, how can we or how can those organizations feel more comfortable adopting those new technologies and changing processes that have been in place for call it 100 years?
Yeah, I mean, and the list of steel companies that have their safety initiatives as a priority. CMC is another one, SDI is another one, Cleveland Cliffs is another. All well respected institutions that I believe confidently that they're trying to look out for their best interests of their employees day in and day out. 365. I think a lot of it has to do with just getting the confidence that one, the technology can make a difference, right? And drive additional kind of improvements in risk mitigation. I think too, there's a little bit of skepticism with the workers. And I've seen it in both non-union shops as well as union shops, where what are you going to do with the data you're collecting? Because, as we talk about technology, it's location tracking, geolocating, right? So knowing where the employees at any given time, so you're able to respond more quickly whenever they need help. Maybe you're collecting biometric data, which may be employees, personal information that is being collected? How do you actually put kind of barriers in place so that that data only gets used for its intended purposes, so that it's driving just safety performance improvement and looking out for the best interest of the worker? And then,
How do you communicate that to workers?
well, I think it's one, full transparency. I think
Hmm.
change management is an absolute essential requirement of technology adoption. Getting the management team and the workers to sit down and say, "Hey, here's why we think we need to do this. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to use the data, and this is how it's going to benefit you and us." Right? And just having that open, honest dialogue, that's generally the ways that I've found in order to really try to change the way that we've done things in the past, is just getting the worker buy-in, and you sit down and just be very candid with why you want to do it and what it can do for them. And generally you get pretty good responses.
Got it. I kind of want to stay on the subject in terms of training. I think the average demographic in the steel space is anywhere from 45 to 60 years old. How do you train employees on how to adopt new technologies or new processes and systems that you implement? Is this something that these steel companies are trying to do internally, or are they outsourcing third party companies to help? I mean, what does that picture look like?
Well, I think it's across the spectrum to a large degree. I think there are certain technology additions that the companies are kind of just deploying, in house. Maybe a little bit of support from the technology provider in training the employees on how to use the equipment. The workers in the steel industry have been exposed to technology advancements. When I started, it was analog controls, and now you have kind of very sophisticated electronic control systems that have models that kind of predict outcomes that allow you to feed forward and adjust processes. So the equipment they operate, has seen this technology evolution. When it comes to technology innovation around kind of wearable type devices and safety related type devices, this is the next kind of area that I think we'll see some growth. So I think it's, you follow a similar model. You put together comprehensive training programs. You try to make the technology simpler to use so that it makes it easier to adopt, and train the employees on how to use it.
Do you feel these technology companies have really embraced the worker? Like, have they built technology that is so simple that anybody can use it, regardless of your demographic or technological background?
I think some have, and maybe some haven't. I've seen some good examples of being able to deploy out of the box technology. Safety Inspection Manager is one that comes to mind. A digitized inspection checklist program that you're very familiar with. That one, you go through some basic training over the course of maybe an hour, just to kind of teach employees, how to navigate through the application and use the application and quote execute the inspections. I think that's really simple. There's some much more sophisticated systems that are out there that require, maybe a more robust training program to skill the employees up to be able to manage and use it. So it's across the spectrum right now.
Can you discuss some of the I guess the regulatory landscape that affects steel? Like, how do OSHA, EPA, DOT regulations shape your daily operations?
So it plays a very instrumental role in shaping, what companies do and what type of equipment they operate, and whether they upgrade equipment or they don't upgrade equipment. Regulations, have evolved over time. You look at all of the environmental control equipment that is embedded in steel manufacturing processes. That's kind of standard issue today, that maybe 35, 40 years ago either wasn't technology that was available or technology that wasn't seen as necessary to deploy. And I think it's environmental regulations, OSHA regulations, a range of NFPA regulations, IEEE regulations, codes and standards have helped the not only steel industry but across all industry to evolve over time to create, I think, more reliable, less risk work environments for not only workers but maybe even communities, depending on what the manufacturing processes are.
So it sounds like there's a lot of regulatory bodies. As a as a company, how do you manage all these regulations?
Well, I mean, you have certain professionals that really specialize and understand, that what are the emerging kind of regulations that are coming through, say OSHA or maybe the EPA, or maybe there's a local environmental governing body that might exist. Um, ANSI standards, FPA. There's a full range of professionals that deal within companies, or maybe there's even consultants that actually work on behalf of companies so that they understand how these regulations are evolving. In a lot of cases, these regulatory bodies ask for input from industry on how this will affect you. And they take that as part of their overall decision making process as well.
So, in terms of the fines themselves, um, there's a statistic about the number of OSHA auditors that exist today. There's only 2,400. I mean, what's the likelihood of a steel manufacturing company getting hit with some sort of fine? Is it really that big of a risk? I mean, there's over a million businesses in the industrial space, and with only 2,400 people, you're talking years in order to do a single audit on one company. I mean, what's the likelihood of some sort of fine being imposed?
Well, I think it really depends on the performance of the company, right? Um, oftentimes, I think the numbers you're quoting are probably federal OSHA. There are a lot of states that actually have a state OSHA, if you will, that has jurisdiction within the types of manufacturing operations that operate within their state. So there's probably additional resources beyond that. But I think the one thing that OSHA typically depends on is employees to report, right? So if there's a flagrant issue that exists within a plant, employees have 1-800 hotline type numbers to OSHA to be able to report those. So usually it's a escalation process. So usually it's, did you report it to your supervisor? Did your supervisor not act on it? How did you escalate it within the organization? And if the employee says, "Hey, I tried to get my supervisor for 2 weeks to take care of this and nothing's happened," that it wouldn't be unusual for an OSHA inspector to show up at the gate within a day or two. And usually it's those type of events that actually kind of start that process with those particular companies. The OSHA inspector comes in specifically looking to address that employee complaint. While they're there, they may ask other questions that could lead to a more expansive visit by an OSHA body, and may even lead to a wall-to-wall audit. So depending on the circumstances, but oftentimes companies that really do try to give best effort to address issues that employees raise, that try to be proactive, to do inspections on a regular basis, to do follow-up actions to address deficiencies identified during inspections. Usually they have a cooperative relationship with their workforce, and the workforce generally doesn't have to call that 1-800 number in order to bring OSHA into it overall. I'm going to say, based on my experience, I don't really recall where OSHA just showed up one day just to say, "Hey, we're here to check out your facility," um, and just come randomly like that. I'm going to say that OSHA doesn't usually work that way. MSHA, on a different hand, which is another government regulatory safety body that kind of governs mining, they do have scheduled audits where they go in and they do inspections in facilities to address issues. So it can vary depending on the body.
We're going to go to another question from the audience, and for those that are listening, I encourage you, on these podcasts, please ask questions. We'll do our best to manage and answer each one. We have one question from Chris. Chris asks, "How are near miss incidents handled and reported in steel plants?"
So I'm going to say, it's company dependent on how they actually govern near miss events. Um, Most companies that have good safety focus want to know when a near miss event occurs. Um, it's really important to understand what happens in near misses, because oftentimes the only difference between a serious injury and a near miss event is luck, and you surely don't want to depend on luck on a particular day, right? So you encourage the employees to be able to report those. Some companies have that a better relationship with their workforce, and their workforce is more willing to report those. In other cases, they may be less willing to do that, and so near misses may go unreported. But the higher the propensity for near misses to occur, the more of the likelihood that you're going to have a bad safety event in the not too distant future. So it's a precursor to kind of safety events that they're. It's a blessing to learn about them because you have the opportunity to investigate, and put corrective actions in place prior to having bad safety outcomes.
So I think that it kind of ties in what you were mentioning earlier about innovations and protocols and systems and new technology that exists now today that wasn't available 10 years ago around these precursors, these near miss incidents. How's technology today used to recognize when these near misses happen, or does this technology not exist yet?
And I'm going to say that technology is emerging to be able to address this. I think that there are certain areas of near misses that technology can actually bring to light in a much more robust way than maybe what is even reported at some of the better companies that are reporting near misses. One that comes to mind for me is employees being in areas that they're not supposed to be. So you could deploy location tracking and control access zoning to have authorized employees and non-authorized employees in certain areas. If there is a pattern of non-authorized employees going into areas that should be restricted, that creates risks that could be classified as a near miss. Another great example of that for
How often
me,
does that happen?
you
How
know,
often are employees in an area they're not supposed to be in?
it probably happens more frequently than most would believe. Um, what's the purpose of this employee, going into an area that maybe they're not trained for gas hazards, and it might be a gas exposure type area potentially. I'm going to say that it probably happens more frequently than people would believe. Another area I think that technology has really quickly emerged to be able to address is collision avoidance or near miss collision avoidance. You have technology that exists today that can be deployed in the field, on mobile equipment, on kind of workers that are walking through areas. And it can create this radius of detection around the individual and the piece of mobile equipment, that as mobile equipment encroaches upon other mobile equipment, or mobile equipment encroaches on workers that are in the area, to actually give them an audible and a haptic alert to say that you're in the area. And oftentimes, people may not even think of that fork truck. I walked out from a blind spot and it missed me by 2 feet. They may not even call that a near miss, but you're going to see that with the technology get reported as a near miss, which gives you an opportunity then to say, why is this piece of mobile equipment interacting with a person that's in the area? What can I do to manage this traffic pattern better? What can I do to speed regulate in order to make sure that the mobile equipment's not operating at a high speed and is able to control the vehicle in case they encounter, a pedestrian walking through the area? There's a lot of different actions you could take.
Yeah, we're going to go to another question, staying along kind of the same topic. And you've mentioned this a little bit a moment ago, but the question is from Dave from South Bend, Indiana, and he's asks, how has the approach to safety in steel manufacturing evolved over the last decade? And I think this ties into kind of some of the technology improvements specifically that you've seen in your day.
Yeah, I think that the different companies are on a different evolution, a different maturity curve. So it's hard to kind of cast the whole steel industry as maturing kind of on the same curve. I think there's always Fundamentally, starting with a safety program is one, a structured process. How do you go about managing risks? So using tools like the risk matrix, hazards assessments, area hazard assessments. So when an employee walks into an area, what are the hazards they're going to be exposed to, and how should you train the employee to manage those hazards when they're in that work area? And then the type of job that they're performing. So a particular job within a particular area could create certain hazards as well. So how do I train the employee to have the skills to be able to perform their work effectively, while at the same time not exposing themselves to safety risks or mitigating those risks so they don't have the exposure? You can do that through some PPE. You can do that through administrative controls. You can also do that through technology. And I think the technology tool in the toolkit is the one that's emerging now. I think most companies have gone that maturing route with PPE and that maturing route with administrative controls. And now I think this next step in the evolution is to deploy technology to assist.
When do you think that we reach that critical mass in this space, a mass adoption of technology?
I think we're seeing incredibly strong interest now. I think that one of the challenges you mentioned it earlier is how do you simplify the deployment of technology so it's easier for steel companies to use it, and be able to quote out of the box, be able to be up and operational with technology deployed. I think there's a whole range of really innovative tech startup companies, even more mature companies that have a track record of safety type equipment in their portfolio that are evolving into smart wearable type technology. So I think it's happening. I think that it's going to continue to escalate, and it's going to, I think, start to grow more rapidly, especially as this technology becomes simpler to deploy and more reliable to deploy.
Got it. Thanks for sharing that. We're going to go to another question here. And the question is from Mario Mendoza in Houston, Texas. Mario asks, what's the most counterintuitive safety practice that turned out to be highly effective?
I'm going to say that generally the most effective safety practices are the ones that are just like almost no brainers, right? It's the ones that it's just that you become complacent, in the work area. You've done this job 100 times. You know what the hazards are. Um, Nothing's ever happened to me before. It's not going to happen to me now. I think there's kind of a lot of reasons around things that work, and it kind of just being very logical why they work and why they should be executed.
What are the importance of inspections? It seems like it's this rudimentary day-to-day manual process, but there's so many ways to automate and streamline inspections, and especially in steel, when you have so many moving parts and so many pieces of equipment and so many things that need some sort of compliance standards met.
Yeah, I think the point you just made is really important. So there are standards for which assets should be maintained. There are standards for which areas should be maintained. And those standards, you want to validate that those standards are continuously being met. And a great tool for that is checklists, right? It's something that you can actually put eyes on it. You can actually do some type of validation testing in order to ensure that those standards are continuously being complied with. Use an example. It might require a daily use inspection by an operator on a fork truck. And why do you do that? You want to make sure that the fork truck operates the way it's supposed to. Do the brakes work? Do the warning lights work? Is the seatbelt intact? Is it in good physical condition? A range of checks that are performed before each use, because you don't want that equipment to operate if there's deficiencies, because deficiencies of that equipment can lead to bad safety outcomes, right? So if the brakes aren't working properly, then that equipment should be taken out of the service. It doesn't meet the standard, and you want it to be repaired, by the mechanics going through and repairing, replacing the brakes, right? But what ends up happening is, because of the diversity of the hazards that exists, across the steel manufacturing operations, the checklists become like almost like overwhelming, right? So you've got a fork truck inspection, you've got a jib inspection, you got below the hook inspections, you've got safety apparel inspections, you got eye wash station inspections, you got safety shower inspections, you got fire extinguisher inspections. All of that just starts to accumulate and create such a tremendous burden that it's really hard to oversee and hard to administer on a compliance basis, and making sure that these inspections are being performed, and quote the documentation needs to be there in order to demonstrate it. And if there's a deficiency, how do you actually manage that? You're able to identify the deficiency on a checklist, get it submitted to the proper organization that addresses those types of deficiencies, oftentimes maintenance, in order to get it scheduled to be repaired so that that deficiency can be taken away and that standard for that equipment can be restored. And that becomes really cumbersome in operations like steel.
So you talked a little bit about equipment inspections. How often should inspections be conducted? And this is probably a loaded question, but how often should inspections be conducted in steel manufacturing facility? And does this frequency vary depending on area or process within the plant?
So usually equipment, you can work through different classification methods. I used to think about it like, what is wear and tear? So what is
Hmm.
normal use of equipment, and based on how many miles a piece of equipment is operating, and when would you expect the useful life of parts within that piece of equipment to start to wear out? But then there's also kind of destructive processes. So just inherent to the production of steel, it causes, for example, vessel linings to erode because of the high heat intensity and the chemical reactions that are occurring, within steel vessels or maybe steel ladles. So you have destructive processes that you try to predict life, and you have just normal wear and tear. So I think a lot depends on the type of equipment and the types of quote service it's being put through as to how frequently inspections need to be performed.
Yeah. What are those critical areas and processes that require the most attention during these inspections?
The ones that can change most frequently are the ones that um, can result in equipment wear and tear based on upsets in the process. Um, and you can have some really, negative outcomes as a result of that. So usually in cases like that, you have real time monitoring of equipment. Certain sensors might be mounted in equipment in order to give you a real time indication of, critical type criteria, with that operation.
And what technology is out there today that's proven most effective in identifying potential hazards?
Well, I think the human eye is probably one of the best, right? Folks that work in steel manufacturing processes, it's, they're actually go out and do an observation of equipment to do a visual inspection. There's other sensors that actually work really well too. Folks are tuned, even though the ambient noise may be somewhat loud in certain types steps within steelmaking operations. Their ears are able to detect what's normal ambient sound and what's abnormal, right? So I've been around folks that it's amazing. They'll be like, "Did you hear that noise?" And I'm like, "I just hear a bunch of noise." And they're like, "No, no, there sounds like there's a fan that's making a rattling noise that is unusual," and they're able to detect that. So they go do an inspection, right? So that draws them to go do an inspection. There's a wide range of technologies now that's available that can actually help with that. But one of the biggest challenges is just performing the inspections to the standard, and being able to relieve that administrative burden. And Safety Inspection Manager is a digitized software program that I think gives organizations the ability to ease that burden where it really resides. It's on the worker to perform the inspections. It's on the worker or kind of the administrative staff to collect all those inspections, to get them to the repair organization if necessary, or to document all those inspections occurring. Being able to have that available in a digitized program where you can deploy it easily on a smart device and put that device in the hands of a worker, and that worker can execute upon those inspections very simply, and then there's no paperwork to manage. You sync it, it's uploaded into the web portal, and that administrative burden is relieved completely. Makes it easier to do the inspections, and I think you're able to have a better compliance to the standards for which equipment should be kept in the field, which will result in less inherent risks over time.
Yeah, and don't forget, when you say what's one of the most proven and effective ways of identifying potential hazards, the human eye, right? So the ability to take photos of those hazards and
Yes,
disseminate that picture and save that to the checklist so everybody has visibility, right? So
yes,
you can record that visual hazard. I mean, that's critical in ensuring safety compliance and in keeping people safe.
yeah. I think that's spot on.
So I got one more question for you, just in regards to, I guess, this aspect of safety inspections, and that's around training. What are some specific training, or what specific training do safety inspectors need to effectively assess risks in steel manufacturing environments?
Yeah, so I think because of the diversity of risks, people that work in different departments need to have kind of a specialized, training program to be able to do the inspections on the types of equipment that they're operating, managing, even maintaining in some cases, um, and being able to, one maintain good records of when these inspections are being performed, and I think there's a certain element of validation, right? So some types of audits that gives you the ability to kind of verify the effectiveness of the training and the standards for which the employees performing the inspections are also helpful. And I think there's ways sometimes audits are viewed negatively. I always viewed audits as being a validation of we're doing things the way we're supposed to, because it gives you that confidence, and you can actually give the employees a great pat on the back for doing a great inspection and making sure the equipment is being operated and maintained the way it's supposed to.
Well, so I think that the last piece here before we sign off is the future. What does the future of safety in steel manufacturing look like? How do you envision the evolution of safety practices in the coming years?
Well, I think there's always going to be an element of PPE. PPE is there's some amazing PPE equipment that exists out there that gives the employee that extra layer of protection, if you will, for when things do happen. I think that administrative controls will continue to play a very critical role in driving, risk mitigation. That's putting in training programs and auditing programs and inspection programs and a wide range of tools in that toolkit. I think technology is the next big step with being able to be able to drive kind of risk mitigation in very diverse hazard environments like steel manufacturing. And I think we're on the cusp of that now.
Well, look, Doug, I can't thank you enough for joining the podcast today. Ladies and gentlemen, the man of steel. Thank you so much for joining us today. Big thank you to everybody that's listened, asking questions. We'll be on in a few weeks to talk about another industry, and we'll have another professional on. It's been a packed session full of valuable takeaways on how to keep our and your workplaces safe. Remember, safety first is safety always. And be sure to catch our next episode with more in-depth discussions with industry leaders like the man of steel himself, Doug Matthews. Until next time, stay safe and stay inspired, everyone. See ya.